Hello all, today's topic of discussion is ancient civilizations. So some of the questions I'm going to want you to think about while we're taking notes are, what makes it so fertile? The area, why did people start here? What makes it a civilization in the first place? Alright, so earlier we discussed the Neolithic Revolution and the dramatic impact it had on Paleolithic culture. We have an agricultural revolution. This includes 2 points, systematic agriculture, where we now have a surplus of food in comparison to hunters and gathering societies, where, their main goal in life was to find food day in and day out. With this systematic agriculture, this is no longer the case. It does free some time for some people. Now, do keep in mind that the majority of the population is still involved with agriculture. We also have domestication of animals. Most likely, it started out with canine species, and then from there went to other species. Probably species that are a little bit easier to tame, maybe like swine, lamb, goats, and then some of your larger animals, the ones that are a little bit more difficult to domesticate. Having these animals increased our food supply, just like with systematic agriculture, between the meat and then also the dairy that many of these animals produced. And of course, labor that you would get from some of the larger animals like oxen. Is civilization. The word itself comes from Latin. The spelling is pretty much the same, just sub out the Z for an S, and it simply means townsman. Now, in order to be civilized meant that you need to be a townsman, live within the town, no longer a hunter and gatherer, and lived within that community. Now, in order to be a civilized person, you are governed by legal statutes of that community. Not other communities, but that specific community itself. In civilizations, of course, civilizations do provide for its people. Think about it. What does our government provide for ourselves? Now, one idea that I really want you guys to take hold of is this phrase. As soon as a civilization cannot provide for its people, it will cease to exist. Now, when I say cease to exist, this can come in many forms. This can be revolutions, revolts, but the civilization as we previously knew it, if that civilization cannot provide for its people, it's going to cease to exist. This is something that we'll probably bring up in class from time to time, and why we see major changes or shifts within civilizations themselves. The first ancient civilization is Mesopotamia. It simply means land between the rivers, and these rivers are the Tigris and Euphrates. Now, some people also refer this to the Fertile Crescent, but I just want to make sure that you guys realize the Fertile Crescent itself stretches all the way from the Nile, which is Egypt, into the Fertile Crescent. So when we talk about Mesopotamia, it is the land between the Tigris and Euphrates. These two rivers have really rich, fertile soil. It's very susceptible to flooding, but this is actually a good thing. Well, good and bad. Good because that rich soil comes down from those Zagros mountains, floods that area between the rivers, and leaves good deposits of soil. So all that mountainous soil will come down, flood those rivers, flood the land also, and it deposits rich soil. It's like farming for dummies. It makes it really, really easy. So it makes sense that the first civilizations sprung up in this area. Now, to go beyond this area, let's say northeast of the Tigris, to expand in those areas, they built canals. Same thing with going southwest of the Euphrates, bring canals out, and now you have the ability to have more agriculture going on outside of this region. So growth. Now, initially we have 3 main city-states in Mesopotamia. City-states are just like that. It's a city and a state, all inclusive. If we went back in time to Assyria, Akkad, or Sumer, we would say, hey, how you Mesopotamians doing? No, they didn't consider themselves Mesopotamians. Instead, they were Assyrian, Akkadian, or Sumerian. They did not really get along too well with each other. Same thing with these three main cities. If we look at Urdu, Ur, and Uruk, yes, they're Sumerian. They share the same language. They share the same cultures. To some of the gods, the same as well. Yet at the same time, they are of that city. They wouldn't consider themselves Sumerian. Okay, so it's important to know that because these cities did war with each other from time to time. So these cities are absolutely massive in comparison to what was going on before. So huge building projects. The city of Uruk, for example, a 6-mile wall completely encircling the city. Guard sentries every 30 feet. These towers makes it really easy to see your enemies coming. Organized religion. They were polytheistic. It's a theocracy. So the people in charge, the rulers of the city, they utilize religion to consolidate their power. Typically in the centers of the cities, you see a massive ziggurat. Now, the ziggurat itself, you have to think about it. So we still have hunting and gathering societies. You have people roaming around, very nomadic. And you come across this huge, massive structure in the middle of nowhere. You know, think of Casino Morongo out in Palm Springs, or near Palm Springs. And there's nothing for miles and miles and miles. And then all of a sudden you happen upon this huge, massive building, flashy lights at night, in the middle of nowhere. It kind of makes you want to go check it out. You know, I'm not a gambler myself, but just seeing that in the middle of nowhere, it's like, huh, that's interesting. Maybe I should go check that out. There are priests and priestesses. I want to emphasize the priestess part because a lot of the cultures we look at are very male-dominated. But no, in ancient Sumeria, we do have priestesses, so in charge of some of the religious rites. And they supervise the temples. We do have a highly organized religious structure within these Sumerian cities. This was the upper class. Remember, as I was saying before, these are typically the rulers within the city. Maybe not the ruler, the priest and priestesses, but at the same time, that's how the authority is given, is through the religion. The gods put that ruler there. They're ruling for a reason. Given money to build temples by the people, and I shouldn't say money, that's probably not the correct way because we do have more of a barter system here. So giving resources, giving time, giving labor in order to build these temples. Now, when we talk about a theocracy, the person in charge is given the authority to rule by the gods. Okay, so that's important. So if you don't, oops, let's fix that real quick. And if you're not good, the gods will get mad, take your ruler away, and then your civilization will fall apart. Dun, dun, dun. Alright, so this isn't just a farming society. You know, I do want to make sure that you realize that now. A lot of time was freed up for a lot of people to do other things besides work on food. So 90% of the people, they were middle class. Okay, so like I said before, majority of them are farmers, but now we have merchants, bartering, selling things. We have fishermen, craftspeople, pot makers, construction workers, all kinds of different things going on. Knife makers, weapon makers, etc. All right. 5% were royalty, priesthood, slaves. Slaves were used as manual labor for building projects. Other people were too. But you got to keep in mind, you know, some of these large structures, you do need a large source of laborers. So we do have trade going on. We're well known for their metalwork. This is the Bronze Age, so you know they had to import tin and copper from other areas directly in ancient Sumer. We don't see copper and tin mines, so we know they had a trading network. There's some other things too we'll talk about in the art and architecture section that shows that they definitely had a trade network because we don't find certain items in the vicinity of ancient Sumeria. All right, so the first actual empire is the Akkadians. Ancient Sumer, remember, these are more city-states, a little bit smaller. When we talk about an empire, it's a collection of city-states. And they typically had to pay tribute because they're now a part of this empire. They're kind of paying for protection. Kind of interesting to see that they spoke a Semitic language. Modern day Semitic is Hebrew. So through languages, we can trace a people through languages. Relatively short-lived. Just about 300 years later, Babylon comes to power. Very powerful empire itself. Now, within Babylon, most of you guys have heard of Hammurabi before. I would hope so anyways by this point. Very strict code of laws. One of the things the Babylonians are known for is their law system. Now, some people think it's pretty harsh. You've heard an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. So based on very strict justice. However, the penalties were kind of based on social class. So if you were lower class and you broke a law against a higher class, the punishment could be greater, and typically was. However, if you were in the upper class and you infringed on the rights, justice wasn't as harsh for you. Think about modern times. Is this still true? If you're considered upper class, do you just get a slap on the wrist? If you're lower class, are you thrown in jail right away and fined? That's definitely something to think about. Make some comparisons here. Now, go ahead and look at this example for a second. And it really shows the idea of what I was just discussing. This tends to be a very patriarchal society. I spoke earlier during the Paleolithic Revolution where men and women, we think anyways, because this is prehistory, that they had relatively equal rights. Yet, at the same time, as we transition to the Neolithic Revolution, it's mainly the men who are, getting that food to the community. So, food is still obviously really important. People get hungry. They need to eat. They need sustenance in order to survive. So, bringing in that food, of course, is a very important job. Who's bringing home the bacon? And in this case, not necessarily bacon, but food is still very highly important. When we look at an ancient Mesopotamian city, typically typified by very high city walls, it's all about protection. They want to make sure their people are protected, and themselves, of course. Remember, you have a lot of nomadic tribes still roaming around. You have city-states fighting with each other, so they're very hung up, if you will, on protection. We do see private homes, shops, streets, shrines, temples, royal palace. Ziggurat, like I talked about before, in the middle of nowhere, this huge structure. Pretty interesting to see that. Now we also have something referred to as cylinder sills. Think of a water bottle with an imprint on the side of it. And you just take that water bottle, you roll it across a slab of clay, you take that slab of clay, and you place it over a door, for example, or a pot, and you know that it shows ownership. If that seal is broken, something happened that wasn't supposed to. Someone opened that door, someone opened that pot. Obviously something wasn't done correctly. Sculpture. When we look at sculpture, we see really wide eyes, tight lips, curled hair, and of course a really cool beard, because all cool people have beards. We see the wide eyes in their sculpture. One of the reasons is because it's the window to the soul. For us, we talk about love in the heart. For some Asian countries, it's the top of the head. For Japan, it's the stomach. That's where our soul comes from for these different cultures. So for them, it was their eyes. Music. We see lyres, harps, drums, so they definitely did have a lot of music in their lives. This was played at religious festivals, civic festivals as well. They read poetries, stories. This was done at births, deaths, marriages, festivals, etc. Credited with the invention of writing, cuneiform. First, legal transactions, wanted to show ownership, who owed who, but also it became a little bit more than that. So, listing out historical rulers, religious texts, etc., and then poems and books. Notice the early literature quotes and how they still apply today. That concludes our notes. There will be something for you to work on in your notebook on the opposing page. So do get ready for that. Have a good day.